Okay, user authentication. I am building a full stack application. I want user authentication involved, so I'm starting with that first. I have an empty directory, and I will touch and create a server.js. I'll npm init-y, and then I will npm install all of the dependencies I will need for a fully built out backend with authentication. So start shouting them out. What dependencies do we need? Not everyone at once. Express, Morgan, Mongoose. Yeah, we're going to do everything that we'll need with user authentication as well. On the back end, .env. This creates our environment so we can have a .env file. Here's our model and querying package. Here's our logger. Here's our server. What's that? Yep, JSON web token, so we can create authentication tokens. Bcrypt for password encryption and decryption. And then what package do we install that's our gatekeeper that checks for a token? Express.js. So we have a list of things we're using now. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dependencies to build this backend. But I believe that's everything. So let's do it. What things don't we need to install because we've installed them globally? There's 2 packages we're using on the back end. MongoDB and one that we installed weeks ago. NodeMon. Yeah. All right, I'm going to create the rest of the files just to make sure my backend is set up. Git ignore to ignore my node modules and my .env file. I'm going to create my .env file and then 2 directories, routes and models. And at this point, I'm set up. I have the base things that I need to get started, except routes needs to be a directory and not a file. So server. And I could ask that we just do this line by line, but to focus on authentication, let's just get this boilerplate built out. Stop me if you have any questions while we go through this. So we're bringing Express. We're going to create our server with Express. We're going to require .env. So our environment file will work, but what method on .env do we have to call here? Config. That configures our environment. That's all we need. We'll pull in our other packages. I'll declare an environment port variable. I think that's everything we need for now. There will be one more. Express job. Okay, so 7 lines of requires and declarations to set up this file. What is the first section that we've been doing right after the declarations? Yeah, so specific middlewares, ones that we want to fire on every request. So I heard it, we'll app.use Morgan, and we'll app.use express.json. So this is giving us helpful console logs. This is giving us the request body when it's sent from a front end, like a post or a put request. All right, after middleware. Database connection, which package and what method in that package do we use? Mongoose connect through the MongoDB protocol to my local host server 27017. Call my database auth practice. Then we'll give it some configurations. Use new URL parser true, use find modify true, and use create index false. And then we've been chaining a dot then and a dot catch onto this. Just know it works similar as the mongoose methods. We can also just get an anonymous callback function that says console.log connected to the database. That will work as well.
So, real quick question. What if you have two databases? There's one. But like when you're storing information through this schema versus different schema.
The schemas are still saved in the same database.
Still go to the same database?
Yeah, so the database is like a big box. I'm just going to do this with my mouse because I only need straight lines. Here's the database because I said it is DB. Each database will have an array of collections. Sorry, it's really hard with the mouse. So here's one collection. Here's two collections. So maybe this is our user collection. Here's our to-do collection. And what do we call the individual items in each collection, each user, each to-do? What's the database word we've been using? MongoDB uses this. Yeah, they're referred to as resources or a specific resource, or more official word, oh, this is awful, is document. Right? They're all in the same, they're all in the database that is called Auth practice. Cool? Yeah. Yeah.
And then if you have to do with another database,
or another collection.
Yeah.
And maybe the to-do needs to relate to this as well.
Yes.
Maybe this is comments.
Yeah.
And each to-do can have any amount of comments that are belonged by a user. And then the to-do is belonged by a user that created it. So we have the user to to-do relationship. This is one to many, right? One user, many to-dos. What is the relationship between to-do and comment? One to many, where the to-do is the one and the comment is the many. So the comment would get the to-do ID, the to-do would get the user ID, but then what is the relationship between user and comments? A user can have many comments. The comments will still only have one user. The user can post many comments, but a comment will only be owned by a single user. Yeah, so you'd have to figure out how you want to orient this. Maybe when we save the comment, the to-do, this one to many, the comment gets the ID of the user that created it and the to-do it belongs to. So it would have two foreign IDs. The to-do would have one foreign ID, the user that owns it, and the user would have no foreign IDs. Its document wouldn't know what it belongs to. But in this case, we could also say maybe we want the user to keep track of their comments. So we give the ID of each comment created. It's up to you, but this would be the standard for it. Comment relates to two things. The to-do it was posted on and the user it belongs to, and the to-do just gets the ID of the user it belongs to. Yep, the comment gets the user ID, and this is the person that made the comment, and it also gets the to-do ID. This is the to-do it belongs to.
So when you say like schema types object ID.
Yep.
Oh, and then it will be like to-do.
To-do, it'd be an object ID of the to-do it belongs to, and user would be the object ID of the user it belongs to. Yeah. You can think of this a couple different ways. You know, user to-do comments. You could think of a song website with artist, album, song. The song may be related to the artist and the album. The album would just be related to the artist. The artist wouldn't know who it's related to. And keeping it as one-to-many makes it really easy because the many always gets the ID of the one. Since the comment is the many on two of these, it will have two IDs. The to-do is the many on one of these, and the user is always the one. Okay, cool, database stuff. After a Mongoose Connect, what are we putting here? Routes. After routes, errors. And after the error handler, listen. So routes, we'll worry about that in a minute. Error handler, might as well put it in. And then the listen. All right, now there's nothing user authentication yet implemented into this. This is just the boilerplate that we've been using for our servers. You can see we haven't used ExpressJot yet. Node is making it dimly lit here. We're gonna start off building out our data and our handlers and all that. So where would I go first? Models or routes? Models. Let's define our data before we define how to use our data. So we'll make our user model, which needs Mongoose. And we'll pull out the schema. And const user schema is a new schema. Once we have the schema declared, we can export it as a Mongoose model called whatever we want to call it, but I'll call it uppercase U user. And it references the user schema to know what blueprint it uses for that model. All right, let's keep our user schema basic. What properties will it most likely need? Username, where the type would be a string. It would be required. We want it to be unique, no duplicate usernames, and to make sure it's truly unique, we'll lowercase them all in our database. Next, we got password, type string, and just required true. We're just going to do that for our user. Well, as I said, we're approaching this with all three parts in mind. So we need to now build in the ability to encrypt this password, to remove the password, to check for the password. So what were we adding to the user schema in part 3? We added one hook and two methods that we then declare on the schema on this file before we export it. So I'm actually going to put this here. All right, so this is the second time we're seeing this. It's still going to be a little interesting, but let's just jump into it. So what is the hook? What is the one hook that we write? It's a user schema dot something. It's currently on the list. It's on the list. Pre. So pre is a hook method that says before what do you want this to fire? We say before you save a new user, call this pre-save hook. And just make sure we're going through this seamlessly. Okay. Now before pre-save, on the pre-save, we want it to fire a function. And why is the function keyword essential in these? this, we want to know what this is. And what is this inside of the hooks or the methods? If I said console log this, yeah, it'll be the user object that this is being called on. Now this is a hook, so it's meant to be fired on the in-between and then continue on, so it receives next as a parameter, so we can tell it when to move on. And just so we can see the user, I'm going to pull it out of this or create a variable that references that. And then here's that one line that we're just not going to worry too much about right now. That bcrypt needs, we say if the user.is modified password, then just move on. And looking into this a bit deeper, me and Martin agree that it is just checking to make sure the password exists in the object before it tries to encrypt it. If the password does not exist, then it's going to move on to the next thing. It's going to try to save the user, and MongoDB will throw an error because there's no password in the object. But if there is a password, we will use bcrypt .hash to create a hashed password. So I need to pull in bcrypt. Bcrypt.hash takes three arguments, sorry. The first one is the password to be hashed. So that's the user we're trying to save in the database on sign up. It takes something called a salt rounds. So you can see here, that's for the algorithm that's doing the hashing. It'll do its operation and then return either an error or the hashed password, sticking to the node convention of handling errors first. So if there was an error, something went wrong, then we're going to pass that to our error handler on the server file. If it wasn't wrong, we want this user's password to now be the hashed password. So we'll reassign the user.password to equal the hash, and then we will just say move on to the next thing. So this does the password encryption on a save. Oh, I knew someone would ask that. Let's look. What are salt rounds? It means cost factor. The cost factor controls how much time is needed to calculate a single bcrypt hash. The higher the cost factor, the more hashing rounds are done. Increasing the cost factor by 1 doubles the necessary time. The salt is a random value, and the salt is usually included in the resulting hash string in readable form. So it does increase the time that it takes because it's saying how many times the algorithm is to run to further keep hashing the password over and over again. I forget the article that I read that said 10 to 12 is ideal, but it's a little bit on how bcrypt takes that argument. Well, this will encrypt the password. What are the two methods we had to create to further handle that password later on? This handles the sign up. What's the method we write for login? Check the password. Yeah. But this isn't a hook. This is a method. So how do I add methods to a model? Dot methods, dot, and then the name of the function. So I'll say check password is the name of the function I want to write. And this function is going to receive a password attempt and a callback function. It's going to take this password attempt, try to compare it against the user's password being submitted or in the database, and then use the callback to either give an error or the success boolean to our route. So we have to use bcrypt.compare that takes the password attempt. So this is the plain text password just given to our backend through a post request. Then it takes the user's encrypted password, which since we're using the function keyword, we have that. It's this dot password. And it will return either an error or a Boolean, which we'll call is a match or is match. So it's working out this logic, and now it needs to give the result back to our route via this callback. So if there was an error, it's going to call our callback with the error passed in as the first argument. But if there was not an error, we're going to use our callback and pass in a falsy value as the first argument and our is match Boolean as the second argument. Right, so if it was successful, whatever callback we give check password will receive a falsy value for the first argument or the Boolean for the second argument. And we'll come back and run through these as we implement them. So what was the last method we had to make? There's one more. And this was to make it so our password never made it to the front end. User schema.methods.without password. Yeah, and this is to make sure after all this has happened, after we've either hashed it and saved it in the database or pulled it from the database and checked it, that's the only time we ever want the password handled. We never want it going to the front end. So we make this last method, again, using the function keyword that grabs the user from that. But right now it's in the form of like a JSON format, so we need to turn it to an object so that we can then delete the password from the object before returning the user and having them sent to the front end. So we'll call this really quickly right before we send them the res.send to delete their password and send them to the front end. We'll also use this in our token encryption. But if we're approaching user authentication, all three parts from the beginning, this is what our user schema needs to look like. Once we have our user declared, we can now go work on the main interactions. This will be the auth router for sign up and login. We'll do these and take a little break. So we'll make our express router and we'll pull in our user model. Are there any other dependencies I'm going to need on this file? Jot. Yeah, we need to be able to create tokens. So and we'll have our sign up route and our login route. So for sign up, what is the method for both sign up and login? Which HTTP method? Post. We'll say it's the sign up, rec, res, and next. Okay, and let's think through the process. On a sign up, the user is going to send us an object to create a new user. What is the first thing we want to do? Check if the user exists, because we want to know if that username is being duplicated. Okay, if the user doesn't exist, what do we want to do then? Create the user. If the user is created successfully, then what? Create a token, and then lastly, send back the user object and the token. So here's the order of the logic. Hey, does this username already exist? If it does, stop the process here. But if it doesn't, great, create the user. If that's successful, great, create the token, and then send back the created user and the token. So now in code, what is the Mongoose querying method I can use to find a single item in a collection. Find one, which takes a filtering object that says, how do you want me to find it? I'll say find it by username. That's what we're most concerned about here. Is this duplicated? So find a user with a username that's equal to the requesting username. To make sure the format matches, we'll lowercase it. Because every username is being saved in our database is lowercase, let's query it lowercase. This will look for the user and either return an error or a value. So we'll handle our error first. All right. So if there wasn't an error, great. Now what do we need to check for? Before step 2, there's one more thing we need to check for to finish off part 1. Yeah, so how could we use this to know whether or not the user exists or not? If user, which tells you what Mongoose sends back. If it found a user, it's sending us an object which is truthy. If it doesn't find a user, it sends back null. So this will evaluate to truthy or falsy. So if it's true, if there is an object, res.status 400, return next. We don't have an error object to send, so how do I create my own? New error. And the error message is whatever I put in here. I'll say that username is already taken. I'm mad about it. All right, that is part 1, if the user exists. Now we're to the point where we know the user does not exist if it makes it to this line. So how do I create the new user object? Cool, so const new user equals, yep, and now I can use my model to actually create the objects. I'll say make a new user from the request body, that the username and password the user sent you. Does this line save it in the database? Right, this gives it the ID and all that, but to actually go save it in the database, we now need to say new user dot save, and this will come back with an error for the saved user. So all I said was new user dot save, but what's happening in the background because of something else I wrote? The save is the keyword there. What's firing because I'm saying save? Our pre-save hook. So we say new user dot save right before it actually goes and does that in the database. It grabs the user object, which now is the new user object. It grabs that object, it hashes the password, and reassigns that object's .password to the hash rather than the plain text. Then it calls next, which then triggers the save. So our pre-save hook is literally implementing all of that code right here and then continuing on to the save. So the user it's saving already has their password encrypted. We will make sure the save went successful by checking for the error. And there's our create a user, step 2. If it makes it this far, the user was created successfully. So I need to make a token. What is the method on JWT that creates the token? .sign, and it needs 2 arguments. What is the first argument? What does it represent? Yeah, so that will be the payload. What data do you want to encrypt into this token? Well, I want to encrypt the saved user object. But right now that still has the password, so I'm going to use my other method without password so that the user object actually sent doesn't have the password in it. The second argument is the signature. This is what makes our server know this token was authenticated, or this user was authenticated through this server. What are we using for our signature? Right, from our environment, which I haven't set that up yet. So now I'm going to go over to env, create a secret, and say unicorns and speakers and microphone and cereal. All right, I got my secret. And that will take this and put it in the payload of the token. This will sign it and give us the token object. So now we can return res.status of 201 because we just created a new user, and .send an object that has the user without their password and the token.
So I was just wondering, like, why you have the token and this and like, could you have it?
Yeah, if I didn't want to do it as a hook, I could write it all right here. Before I do the new user.save, if I didn't want to write this over in the user schema, I could do it all right here. But except user this, it would actually be new user. And then it's just checking if that user is modified. And we wouldn't be calling next because we don't need next. Next, new error, no password to encrypt. And this would encrypt the user's password, reassign the new user's .password to be the hash, and then go save it. So we could do it right here, but it kind of clogs up the route a bit more. So instead we make it dynamic and add it as a hook, so it just happens in the background. We could do the same without password and check password as well. You can write all this code right in your route. Oh, this is a nice modular way to do it. And I broke something. What did I break? Well, let's start up our server and see if it works. Okay, it doesn't know what it's talking about apparently. Or if it does, we'll find out as soon as we call this function. So let's test it. We finally have our user model set up. We have sign up created. Let's go to Postman and see if this route works. Well, it won't just yet. We don't have any endpoint set up. So I'm going to make up an endpoint here that's called auth. And any request to /auth needs to go look at the auth router routes file. And this makes the endpoint /auth /signup. And now we're getting the error letting us know it's broken. Unexpected end of input. Oh, it's so ambiguous. We're missing a bracket somewhere. It's not that one. Oh, yeah. I think we're missing another set of these. No. Cannot read property push of undefined. All right, let's follow our brackets. This one closes nowhere. Oh, somebody help me. Auth router line 8. Oh, that's correct. Then we need to have a bracket in parentheses. Okay. Then a bracket and a parenthesis. What are we missing here? I'm gonna pause.
Those principles.
And the recording is resumed. That only took like 2 seconds. We found it super quickly, and it was, we're really smart and better for it. So now, yeah, now we're gonna test this endpoint to see if we can sign up. Auth sign up. We will send headers, content type as JSON, and a body. And here's a good username and password. We'll test, we'll send. Cool, so we got the username back, no password though. Our without password function's working. We have our token, so sign up is good. So now we just need to build login. And we'll take our break. All right, so the order of the logic for login. What is the first thing we need to do? Okay, first we'll see, does that user by that username exist? What do we do after that? We've confirmed, hey, the username they submitted exists in the database. What is the next thing we want to check? Check to see if their password matches. All right, if they exist and their password matches, we go to the same step 4, create token, send user object and token. So seeing if the user exists is the exact same way we do it with the sign up. We do a find one for their username. The user.find1 whose username matches the requesting user's username lowercase. I'm just going to try and find that user. We'll handle our error first per normal. But we're still on this first step. How do we see if the user exists? So again, what can I ask on line 44 to see if this is truthy? If user. What do we want to have? What we want to do if this username does exist and we're in login? So if user is what we're actually looking for. We want to see if there is not a user. Which with sign up, we're like, hey, does that username exist? If so, that's a problem. We're login. If the user doesn't exist, that's a problem. That means the username doesn't match anything. So if there's not a user, we'll set a 401 unauthorized status. And what would we want our error message to say? Yep, the only problem about this is saying, hey, you typed username wrong, try again. If that's not the person, we're giving them hints, so we'll say username or password are incorrect. All right, and that covers step 1. Step 2 now. We need to see if the password matches. So what did we write to help with that? We already wrote the function, fortunately. As soon as this returns to Earth, we will continue. Yeah, so we wrote the method check password. We can call on any user object. All it needs is a password attempt and a callback function. So here's our user object that we got from the database, and we'll tell it to check their password. So this user object has the encrypted password inside of it. rec.body.password is the password attempt. So we give it the first argument of the attempt, and then the second argument is a callback that will give us back either an error or the is match. So we'll give it the callback function here. And this will give us either an error or the is match Boolean. And we can check if an error occurred in that check password process, you are not authorized. And we'll tell them username or password. Actually, in this one, we can just say error, because this will be the bcrypt error. And then we'll check the is match. This will be true or false. So if the password was not a match, that's what we'll say, res.status. For one, and return a new error, saying the same thing as before, username or password are incorrect. There's step 2, check to see if the password matches. So now we're on the last part. If they made it to line 58, their username and their password match, they are authenticated. We can create their token. We'll send in the user without their password as the payload, and we'll sign it with our environment secret. And then we'll pretty much res.send the same thing we did with login or with sign up. So return res.status 200 in this case, and .send the user and the token. We want the user to be the user without their password. So these are almost identical in both routes. The main part and this part is almost identical in both routes. Both routes start off by checking for the user. It's all about, we're checking to make sure the username doesn't exist on sign up, and then we're making sure the username does exist on login, so we can then check their password. So let's test that and make sure it works. Let's try to log in as AA. There we go. All right, so let's test the, we tested a successful login and sign up. Let's test an unsuccessful login and sign up. So I'm gonna try to first sign up with a duplicated username that's already in the database to see, hopefully, something. We could not get a response. What is the cause of that? Any guesses? Yeah, my server's not running. That's something. So let's start the server. Nodamon server.js. Hey, and we'll fail signing up. Great, that username is already taken. And now let's try login with an incorrect password. Actually, first let's do it with an incorrect username. Username or password are incorrect, great. Let's fix the username but break the password. Username or password are incorrect, and then let's do one more successful. It is successful. So we know those two routes are handling every eventuality. We know they work. Before we leave the backend, I am going to implement Express Jot so that later when developing this application, it's already in use. So right above in my routes here, I'm going to app.use, and I'm going to create a mount path or an endpoint that any request through this endpoint requires a token. What is a good conventional name for that? API. And if that's the case, we're going to use Express Jot to compare the token signature secret to the local environment secret. And if these two match, that means this token came from this server, we'll let them through. But if it doesn't match, it's going to throw a specific error with the name of unauthorized error. And if that's the case, we'd like to set the status before we send the error message. So we're going to add to our error handler, if the error's name is equal to an unauthorized error, set the status to the error's status. And then we'll go ahead and send the error message the same way. So we add in our little gatekeeper here that checks for token. Now, if it does find a token, where does it put the user object that's encoded in that token? It creates a rec.user. So this is really nice. Any request that comes to /API, we have a rec.user that tells us who's making this request. So we don't have to send the user's ID to the URL. It's coming through the token. Because as we recall in our routes, when we create the token, we're encoding the user's information in them. This is what ExpressJot is pulling out when it receives the token and placing it in rec.user so we know who's making the request. So we have a rec.user._ID of the requesting user. Super helpful. And at that point, your backend is done until you're ready to start adding in more endpoints, models, and routes. But as far as authentication goes, this is complete. So we have a client folder now that represents our entire front end. And I installed a Create React app into here. I made 3 folders for our different components. And then I just have a basic index in app.js. So to start us off, what node modules do we need to install after we call Create React app? Axios, React, Router DOM. That should be good. There's always more if you want more features, things you find online, but this is what we're requiring for the project. You must use these 2. And let's set up the routing first, and then we'll build in the form, logging in and such. So I want React Router in my website. What do I add first to the index.js? Browser router from React Router DOM. It is a provider component, so we're going to wrap it around whatever we need to have access to its props, which in this case is our whole application. And then in our app.js, we're going to create the route functionality. So the 2 components I need from React Router DOM to do this, route and switch. And then we introduced another one that allows us to send the user to another route automatically. Redirect. Cool, it's also a component, so capital R, redirect. So we're going to set up our switch and our base route. We'll make the exact path to / be our authentication page. So let's create that page real quick. We'll go into our components. I'm going to do that structure I've been using where I create a folder called Auth and give it an index.js file, which will be the Auth component. Now that I kind of have the bare bones of this, I can go import it to my app.js. And tell it to load that component. But render on a route, on a React route, what does it provide you? What do we have to give render here for this to work? A function. It is a callback function because render is going to be giving you the router props, which I'll call R props. And we can say with that function and the router props, return the auth component and give it all of those router props. Does anyone remember the 3 router props we're given? What comes with React Router? There's 3 of them. Match, history, location. Yep. So that's what we're making sure Auth has access to. Because while our whole app is being provided those props, we still have to manually consume them. It's still a context. This is one way we're consuming it. Route offers render props. Hey, it's a render prop component. Cool. All right, well, this component's going to need a form for login and sign up. Are we going to make 2 forms or 1 form? 1. Why can we just use 1? You could, but even more generally, will these forms need any different inputs depending on whether it's login or sign up? In this example, no, they're both taking a username and a password, so we should only have to make the form once. Placeholder. We'll make this look better. Oh, what did I do? Go ahead and duplicate this and create one for password. And then a button down below. Okay, so we have our form. It doesn't have all the values it needs yet, but it's templated out to be ready for the values when we pass them down via props. So I'll split this to the right. And on the left here, we'll go back to the auth component and we'll import that auth form. And we're going to want 2 of them. One for login, one for sign up. So I'm just going to put 1 on for now, but we will end up using this component twice. All right, in this example, again, we're not using render props, so we need to build everything into this auth component. So first, the form. What do I need to add to my auth component that this form needs over here? The functionality, so a handle change. And then this form is going to be for sign up, so we'll do a handle sign up. But we're also going to make a form for login, so we'll have a handle login. What inputs are we going to be maintaining in state? This is so our handle change can control the form. Username, password. And our handle change will just do what it usually does. It pulls the name and the value from the event target and set state to update the appropriate name and state to the event's value. Okay, so we have our state and our handle change. Let's work on our, let's put the e.prevent default in here and then pass all this down to our form so we can plug it into the right pieces. So auth form needs username from this.state.username. It needs password from the same. It needs handle change. And then what am I going to call the prop for handle sign up? I need to pass this function down as well, but for the other form, I'm going to be passing down handle login. So what should I call the prop so that this form can receive the prop in both cases, but call a different function? Yeah, we'll still call it handle submit, but we'll reference a specific function. This one will be for this.handle sign up. One last one that I like to include is button text, and this one will be sign up. So now over here on the form where we're passing this all down, let's deconstruct all those props out of the props object. Let's get username, password, handle change, handle submit, and button text. And now we just plug them into where they need to go. Handle submit, username, handle change, and the button text. All right, so we created all the values up above in our auth container. We passed them all down to the auth form. We then deconstruct all of these out of the props objects. We can just use them by their pure name in the form. Well, I'm going to add the prevent default to this handle login as well. And then I'm going to duplicate this form. And what's the difference between the sign-up form and the login form? The button text will change to login. And what else? The handle submit should be calling handle login instead of handle sign-up. So that's going to be the only difference. And this is why modular frameworks are so popular. Hopefully you can see these examples. We wrote this form, it took a minute, but then I can use props to pass down the same info as such as these three, or dynamic info such as these two. Something that can change, but it'll still be called the same thing in the form. Well, what does our website look like right now? Probably super cool. Yeah. Now what's going to happen when I type in username here? That's ambiguous. Yeah, so why are these shared? It's the same piece of state. This is being passed down as a reference to both forms, and they're using the same handle change as well. Since they're using the same inputs from the same state, and their values in the form, the value is tied to that piece of state. When this one updates, the value of this one updates as well, because they're tied to the same data. So we don't want these to both show at the same time if we're doing it this way. So what's something else I would want to implement on this page? Dynamic render. I want to show one or the other. What is a nice way to say show this one or show this one? A toggle with a ternary? Sure. So we'll put a is toggled Boolean in state, and we'll make a toggler method to switch it back and forth. Which does this dot set state with prev state, and sets is toggled to the opposite of the previous states is toggled. So with this Boolean and this method, we now have the ability to have a true false effect in our state, which is the easiest way to do a dynamic render. So everything that's going to be a part of the dynamic render needs to be wrapped in curly brackets. So we are telling our JSX that this is now going to do a JavaScript expression. Right, so these are both wrapped inside. And we're going to ask if this dot state that is toggled as false with the exclamation point. If this is false, then show the sign-up form. And in between these both else, show the login form. And now we can see on the left at refresh, and we only see one form, but I have no way to get to the other form. Even though the functionality is here, I haven't provided a way to toggle it. So this is where I'd add something like a p tag that says already a member, or need to log in. And this one would say something like need to create an account. But now I'm getting another error. What's going on here? Yeah, this statement is returning two things, and this statement is returning two things, which still breaks the adjacent JSX rule. So a quick fix is using the React fragment. So now they have a shared wrapper. Now I can just put my toggler method on the on-click for these p tags. I'm able to now Go between the two forms. Is this the only way to do a sign-up page? There's no right or wrong way. As long as you have the ability to do a sign-up and a login, you're good. This is one way I like because it's a single page. You can toggle between the two. But you can make a login page. You can make a separate sign-up page and do them separately. It'll be similar, just a little bit more code. All right, so we have the UI built. None of this was really functionality, right, other than the handle change and the toggler. We now need to build the ability to handle signing up and logging in, which will not be done in this file. Where are we going to put all the user information and token information and all the methods? Context. So we have our basic route set up that goes to the login page, but none of the functionality has been provided yet. So in our context, we're going to make a user provider. So I'm running through the render and the return. This returns the context provider, so we got to create that, the user context from react.create context. This returns a variable, which we're calling user context, that has a .provider and a .consumer component. Our provider component is going to return the context provider wrapped around some element, which we'll refer to as this .props.children. And then the provider needs a value property to know what to provide to said children. So we can just start filling this in with stuff. Well, we need a way to consume this value object as well. So a common method for this is making a higher order function called with_user. In this case, because it's providing user data, it will take a component as its first argument. As a function, this function will return a function that can take props. And when this function is called, it will return the user context consumer, which provides the value from its parent provider that we can then pass to our component by spreading in the value and spreading in the props, like so. So we have our setup. I like to get this base setup and then go make sure all the parts are where I need them to be. So where do I need to go put the user provider component? Index, just like the browser router. I need to teach my app about this other data. So user provider from our user provider file. We'll also wrap it around the app. Okay, and we're providing. So now we can just choose where we want to consume later. Let's also export default the user provider. What state will this provider maintain? For sure. The user, which is what data type? User has an object, cool. And then the token, which both of these are not any value because they have not logged in or signed up yet, or so we think. Well, we have a sign up route and a login route, so we're going to make a sign up method and a login method that will interact with the backend. And before I even fill out any more things here, I'm going to put all the stuff into the value object. So you're going to receive user from this .state.user and the token, and sign up and login. So everything is being provided to the value object, so I can then pass that value to any component I choose.
So
instead of saying this. Yeah, instead of passing state values down separately, you can also say, give me everything from this dot state. And that's going to be the exact same as saying this. It'll do the exact same thing. We'll have a props.user and a props.token. This will have a props.user and a props.token. Just so we can see it explicitly, I'm going to keep it like that for now. All right, so auth form, handle signup is going to call that signup function from context. What is that function going to need from this component? It's going to need this data. It's going to need to know what username and password the user just entered. Yep, so we're going to tell the function to accept some credentials. In fact, both of them are going to receive the username and password from that other component and then do an HTTP request. So we need Axios. And what is the endpoint for signing up? Cool. And I could go check my server file and the route file if I needed to double check what that was. And then what will the second argument be? Credentials, which again, this is the object with the username and password the user just typed in on the form. This will get a dot then and the dot catch. I have not connected my front end to my back end yet though. So where do I need to go and what do I need to add to make sure this request actually hits my own server back here? Yes, not the package JSON of the back end, the package JSON that's inside the client folder. We need to tell it how to proxy. So we'll come say proxy to HTTP localhost 7000. And proxies will take an effect anytime we send a request that starts with /. If this was a post request to another API that we were using, it would not proxy to our server. It would then go do it to the URL we're giving it. It's the fact that we're saying make this request to auth signup that says, oh, this must be a local, or the server this site is running on. Let's request to that server at this endpoint, and this proxy is automatically added to the front of it to send it over. So signup is now it's set up correctly. It's being provided via the provider. We now just need to consume. So I'm just going to consume directly on the auth page this time to get that data. I'm going to import with user from the context user provider file and export default with it so I get all the props. So how do I call the signup function now? If it's coming from my provider, how do I refer to it in this file? This dot props dot signup. Yes, so anything provided via the value object, when we consume with the consumer, it puts everything from that value object into our component's props. So I have a this.props.signup, I have a this.props.token, props.user, props.login, all this. Well, it needs the credentials. So I'm going to make that its own object and send it. So const user credentials equals an object with a username, state.username, and password. And we'll send in the user credential object to signup. Signup will receive it, make the post request with that object included, and now we're console logging response and reject. So let's make sure both are running and we can test it. Everything's running. Okay. So I'm going to start off with signing up as AA. What should I get back if that user already exists? We should see this error. Just to make sure we can see it, I'm going to console.dir it. So A, sign up. Status of 404 not found. What could possibly be the problem here? I know this endpoint exists. So maybe I'll double check myself, come back here, and okay, we do have auth, and we'll go to auth router. We do have sign up. So I know it's not that. Why would this be not found if for sure the endpoint exists? When does this proxy take effect? When you start up your front end. My front end was already started when I added this, and I have not reset it. So I'm going to stop it and restart it and try this request again. Sign up. Ah, bad request. Cool. Why was it a bad request? Let's open it up. See the response.data.error message. That username is already taken. It's exactly what we wanted. So now we'll sign up as a new username, DB, and there's our response.data.user that has no password and .token. So sign up is working. We don't just want to console log the response. Let's open up a function body here. And what do we want to do with data and token? I'm going to deconstruct them so we have them here. But there are two places I want to save both of these. State and local storage. So first I'll save them to local storage, both of them. I'll local storage, set item, the user, but it's a complex data type, so this needs to be stringified into JSON. So I'll say json.stringify the user when you save them. And then local storage.set item token, it's already a string, so we can just send it up. That saves it in local storage, and then we'll do a this.set state and save the user and token in state. Okay, what is the difference between the sign-up method and the login method? Yeah, let's copy this whole thing. We'll change the endpoint to login. And there we go. The only difference between those two methods. So we should be able to try login as well. Let's make sure there's nothing in local storage yet, so we can test this for sure. There's nothing here. We'll log in as AA. Ooh, what's happened? Maybe it didn't get my button click. Let's try it again. Ooh, where would I go to look for why this is not doing anything? My handle submit in the auth file? Okay, let's look there. Why isn't anything happening? All I'm doing is preventing the default. Yeah. Well, this function is the same as the sign up, except the function it's calling. So we're going to grab the user's credentials, and we're going to call this.props.login instead. That is already being provided down to the form, so now we should be able to log in. It's AA, login. There we go. We are logged in. Now, I would definitely be testing it every step of the way like this. Don't try to build a whole bunch and then test. It's nice to know, like, I just typed 20 lines of code and then it broke, so something in those 20 lines, versus I just wrote 6 more components and something broke. I now get to check those 6 components. All right, so that got sign up and login going. And for our intents and purposes, that's done for this page for now. But what would we expect to have happen? I am logged in right now. I have a token, but I'm still on the login page. So what would we expect to have happen? Redirect them if there's a token. So we're going to create a second page here. This is a dummy page. We'll call it the profile page. And this is the page you go to as soon as you log in. So profile, import, React, let's profile. Profile. Let's say this, H3 profile. And then the P tag will say, hello, at, and then whatever their username is. We'd like to see this page show up and their actual username when they get here. So in the app.js, I'm going to import the profile component. And I'm going to make a route for it. Okay, so we have our 2 pages, but I need to automatically reroute to profile if I'm already logged in. So after this fat arrow, I need to see if there's a token. What does that mean I need to do with my app.js? Turning it into a class will not give me the token. Yeah, wrap it. Let's grab our import with user from. And this is a little different than the first example I did because I'm having app consume. I'm also having auth consume. That's totally fine. With user. And now I'm receiving props that have the token and the user in them. Everything from the provider is now being put by props. So I'm taking out the pieces I need. I really need the token so that when I'm loading the authentication page, I can first ask, is there a token already? If there is a token already, or if there's not a token, sorry, then load the authentication page. But if there is a token, redirect them to the profile page. Do you see how this is working? It's my ternary statement. If this is not true, they're not logged in, load this component. Otherwise, redirect to this route, which will trigger this path and load our profile. Not working yet though. I have my token here and I'm refreshing. Why am I still stuck on the login page? Well, let's check React state. Make sure React state knows there's a token. Odd. My token and user in state are empty, but my token and user in local storage are plentiful. So how do I tell my state to say, hey, if there's local storage, use it? Yeah, right now I'm setting state to default empty items whenever this page loads. I only want it to be empty if a token doesn't exist. So I'm going to say, or if the user object doesn't exist. So for setting state of my provider, I'm going to say local storage.getItem user if there is one. If there's not, then start off with an empty object. But this is in JSON format right now, so we need a JSON.parse the object down if it does exist, or an empty object. And then the same with the token. We'll say local storage.getItem token. If there isn't one, now it's an empty screen. Now when the page refreshes, I'm on profile.
Or instead of wrapping the app, could you just do your ternary side of the redirect storage?
Yeah, but since I already have the token and I'm going to be keeping it here, this is a good place to have it. But yeah, right here you could say local storage.getItem token. Then do this, else do this. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Cool, yeah. Yeah, that would work. All right, but here's another thing. If I don't have a token, I don't want to be able to be on the profile page. I should be sent back to the login page in this app's example. So I could do a similar redirect right here. Sorry, my mouse is skipping all over, so I know if I type, it's going to be frantic. Okay. So if there is a token, then sure, let them through to the profile page. But if there's not a token, redirect them to the login page. And now when the page refreshes, I'm sent back to login. And what's nice about this, even if I manually try to go to the profile page and hit enter, it redirects me back to login. So I'll log in now, redirected to profile. If I delete the local storage tokens and refresh, I go back to login. Automatic redirects. This is referred to as a protected route. It's protected because you have to have a token to get to it. Just like on the back end, we set up our server with ExpressDrop. You must have a token to get authorized data. On the front end, you have to have a token to see that data. Synced on both ends. Now I'd like profile to say hello user name, so I'm going to spread the user object in here as well that I'm getting from props. So here I can say hello at props.username. I'm going to sign up as Rick, and Rick, sign up. Hello at Rick. It's personalized. Okay. Now that is the gist of getting someone logged in and signed up. Other methods we'd want to add to this is handling errors, logging out, and making authorized requests using the token. How do we feel about those features? Generally upset, unsure. Well, we can cover logout. It's straightforward. What resembles the user being logged in? So logout says remove that data. So we're going to local storage.remove item token, local storage.remove item user, and then this dot set state. User should be an empty object, token should be an empty string. They are now logged out. Delete any trace of them being here. And because we have our redirects checking for a token, this page will reload, see that there isn't a token anymore, and send them back to the login page when they click logout. So let's make sure logout is being provided to our application. Then in our app.js, we'll deconstruct that out of props. And we'll say here, if there is a token, then show a button that allows them to log out. And onClick will call logout. Okay, so we're logged in, so we see the logout button. We click it, we're redirected to sign up, the logout button disappears because it's only rendering if we have a token. Cool. Hello. How hard is it to get the authentication errors to show up if they fail signing up or fail logging in? Does anyone remember how we handled that? Make a little handle auth error method that receives an error message. So if login or sign up fails, we'd like to know about it, not just console log the error object. So we're going to save an error message in state. And if there is an error, what part of the error object will actually have the error message? Error.response.data.error message. And we'll see that here. I'm going to fail signing up, and we're going to just see the message at the console. I'm going to sign up under a reused username and sign up. That username is already taken. So here is our message. I would like to pass that to this function and have it do this.setState for the error message and save it in state. So instead of console.during it, I'm going to call this.handleError, auth error. And I'm going to duplicate that for the login. Oh no, oh no. Great. Do I need to provide handle auth error to my app? No, only this component's using it. What my app does need to know about is the error message in state. So that on my auth component, if an error occurs, I can show it. So I'll put another p tag here. Error message. And a p tag here for error message. But it's going to be this.props.error message. If I fail signing up, it'll now show up. And if I fail to log in, it'll show up. What else did we do in user authentication that we have not done in this app? Well, we're not really using any API endpoints. That would be the last piece, adding a token to every request so the backend could get it. But this is all three parts completed without the token being added, but everything else is done.